Hello artists, and welcome to day 84 of the Epic Journey. I'm DaleneFM, and today we're going to be talking about the accuracy of getting your drawing onto canvas before you start painting. Now there's a couple of different ways that artists can use to get their drawings onto canvas. The way that I teach my in-studio artists is to use the grid method, but it's not the only method available. There are some videos that I've done already on the grid method. I did a couple of videos quite early on getting your drawing onto canvas using the grid method. There was a video on aspect ratio, and there was a video where I had a frame with strings across it that I used for when I was sighting a live model, for example. Now the nice thing about the grid method is that as you get more accomplished at it, you can use fewer and fewer lines. Now there are a lot of artists that use an enormous amount of lines on their grid, to the point that each little grid is so tiny, some of them are completely empty, and in something like the eye, for example, will be crisscrossed with lots and lots of little lines. Now I don't advocate using that many lines. Number one, because I think that if you start to depend too much on the grid lines on your canvas or on your drawing, then it starts to detract from your ability to draw without lines. So the fewer lines that you use, the better it is for your artistic development. I feel that if you start to depend too much on those blocks, like I said, then it eventually gets to a point where you cannot draw without them. The whole idea of using the blocks or the grid method is that your grid, over time your grid gets bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually you've just got a center line, a vertical, and a center line horizontal, and you don't need anything more than that. And then you get so good at that eventually you don't need those lines anymore either, the center lines anymore either. So I'm not going to go through the whole grid drawing thing now. I've done that in previous videos. If you want me to recap it, please drop a comment in the comments bar and I will gladly do that. The video was entitled Aspect Ratio, if I'm not mistaken. And there was also a video entitled How to Draw Using the Grid Method on a Live Model, or something to that effect. Now, a lot of artists will also measure. So what you would do in a case like that, it's actually really simple in terms of the theory of doing it, is that you would just measure from the outside of your source material to a point, from the bottom to a point, from the side to a point, and you'll get the basic dimensions of what it is that you're trying to draw. If it's a portrait, for example, you draw up to the ear on this side, up to the ear on that side, the top of the head there, and the chin there, and then within that frame, now you know that's where the face has got to fit, you start measuring from the hairline down to the brow, or from the ear across to the outside corner of the eye, whatever the case may be. You start measuring all your little bits and pieces. The nice thing about the measuring method as well is that you can draw lines across your model. For example, let's say from corner to corner of the eyes, you get that angle right, and you can then compare the angle of the lines to the angle of, say, the line of the mouth, or the line of the nose, or the line of the jaw, that sort of thing. I do sometimes use the grid method. If I feel that I'm really, really struggling to get accuracy, then I might put a couple of grid lines. I do also use the measuring method, where I would measure across the proportions of the face. But when it comes to drawing from life, it's actually also a nice thing to do to use the sighting method. I'll demonstrate to you a little bit about how to sight from life. First and foremost, you want to stretch your arm out that it's at full stretch. Okay. If you're right-handed, you're going to be drawing with your right hand, so you want to use your left hand to sight, and then you're going to want to close your right eye. If you can't close your right eye, you've got a bit of a problem, but you're going to want to close your right eye, and you're going to want to sight your model using something in your hand like your pencil. But now, a good thing to do, if you have a look now, the distance between my eyes and my shoulder is going to be a variable. So to eliminate getting that variation of measurements because of this sort of movement, you tilt your head to the one side, put your ear on your shoulder. Now you've got a direct line of sight from your shoulder, and your arm actually acts as your radius. So it doesn't matter how you turn, your head and your hand are going to be turning together. So you keep your eyes in front of you, close your left eye, put your ear on your shoulder, and sight your model like that. Now what you would do in that case is that you would pick a measurement on your pencil. Let's say, okay, that's the height of the head, and then you would say, right, how many head heights down the model? Or that's the width of the face, so how does the width of the face compare to the width of the shoulder, for example? So you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to be comparing measurements all over the model's body to get the proportions all in place. And of course you would possibly do the same thing for landscapes. You could even do it for portraiture. If you're drawing portraiture from life, you'd actually be quite a lot closer. So you would measure, that's the width of the eye compared to the width between the eyes, the other eye maybe, the height of the ear, and so it would go. And as you're measuring, so you would then translate that measurement onto your canvas or onto your paper. Now the nice thing about that is that it's not an actual measurement as such. You're comparing one width or one dimension to another. So you could say, for example, if you were doing a portrait, you could say, right, draw a line on your paper. That's the top of the head, that's the bottom of the chin, and now you're going to cite little measurements within that. And if the height of your model's face is from top to bottom of that pencil, and then you can say, right, there's the nose. You can have a look and say, okay, that's, I don't know, 2/3 of the way down, jump to jump, draw your line, and so it goes. So we will do the citing method in more detail. I'm just giving you a bit of an overview now quickly. The other method that a lot of artists use to translate their drawing onto their canvas is with projection or tracing. Now, I personally don't teach projection or tracing because I personally feel it's a little bit too much on the cheat side. I know that there's a lot of artists that use it, so please don't feel that I'm criticizing it or talking against it in any way. I just prefer not to teach it. I prefer to teach methods that are going to develop your skills rather than allow them to stay undeveloped. Now, when you're tracing from something and putting onto your canvas, it's a bit of a problem if you've got a big canvas, because you need to blow up your source material to the size that you're going to paint it. You need a large piece of tracing paper. You've got to trace it out, turn it over, trace it around again, turn it back again, put it on your canvas, draw all over it again. So it can be a little bit of a schlep, and it's really not going to help you to develop your drawing skills. The only thing that's going to help you to develop your drawing skills is to push the envelope and to actually draw using your brain to interpret the measurements, rather than using a method like tracing or projection that is not going to allow you much interpretation. Now, of course, projection is another way of doing it, where you would have a slide projector of sorts projecting the image onto your canvas, and then it's much easier than tracing, but it's a similar thing. You just trace around the outlines, and that will give you the accuracy that you're looking for as well. But again, not a lot of artistic skill involved in that, so it's not something that I would necessarily recommend. But I will say, though, that there is a lot of evidence to suggest that the old masters actually used a thing called a camera obscura to produce the original drawings on canvas. Now, what they would do is they would put themselves inside a dark tent or a dark room, and they would have a little hole with a lens, and their models would be on the outside of the room, and the light was usually outdoors, so that the sunlight would help to project the image of the models through the lens and onto the canvas. So it was a very primitive form of the projector. And the artist would then go outside, position their models in the way that they want them, come back inside the tent or the room and draw it onto the canvas. They would then go back, reposition their models, because they would often use one model for multiple figures. So they would position the model in one place for one of the figures, draw the outline on, then they would go back and reposition the model for the next figure, move them to a different place. So those are the major methods that artists will use: the grid method, the citing method, the tracing, or the projection method. So the point to this whole story that I'm telling you now is, whatever the method is that you choose to use, please make sure it's accurate. Because if you don't start your painting with an accurate drawing, an accurate plotting out of your subject, whatever the method is that you use, or however it is that you choose to put it down, whether it's a pencil or a charcoal like I do, or a brush and paint, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's accurate. You really need to make sure that your drawing is accurate before you start painting. If you're under the impression that while you're painting you can tweak and fix things, be careful. It's very difficult to do that, because number one, you get lost in what you're doing. Number two, to paint and correct accuracies at the same time is going to cause an enormous build-up of paint on your canvas. It's going to slow down your painting process quite considerably, because you're forever tweaking and correcting instead of depending on the painting process. And the thing is, the process of transferring a drawing onto your canvas is very much a left brain process. Yes, although it is a creative process and it's a very artistic process, it's much more analytical than what the actual painting process is, which will occupy the right side of your brain. Now, what's going to happen if you are trying to do the analytical stuff and the creative stuff at the same time? You're going to keep interrupting your train of creative thought. Your right brain dominance is going to end up having to submit to your left brain dominance, and that will interfere with your creativity. So what I like to do is I like to put aside all the left brain activities right at the beginning. I get my accuracy of my canvas right, and I spend a lot of time doing it if I have to. The more time I spend getting my drawing right, the better my painting is going to be, and the less time I have to spend correcting my painting. So I'll get my drawing out of the way, I'll get my colors mixed, I will set up my space the way that I get everything ready before I actually start doing the painting process. Because once you start painting and you engage your right brain into the creative process, you don't want to interrupt your right brain's creative thinking pattern. To now stop that and correct an eye that might be a little bit too slanted, or to correct a lip that might not be smiling enough, whatever the case may be, or even to interrupt that train of thought to now mix a color because you originally didn't mix enough of that color. All of those little activities that you have to interrupt yourself to do is going to mean that you are now taking a step back in terms of the creative process, in terms of your right brain thinking. So you've then got to spend a bit of time getting yourself back into right brain thinking once again. And artists, if ever you find yourself in this situation where you've disengaged from your painting because your right brain thought process has been interrupted by something that you've had to do, like mix another color or correct something, or even somebody coming into your art space and starting to have a conversation with you in the way that you have to talk back to them, because by speaking to somebody is also going to interrupt your right brain rhythm, and you might end up finding yourself disengaging from the painting, and it takes you a little bit of time to get back into it. If you find yourself in that situation, then find an activity that you can engage in that will help your right brain to re-engage before you start painting again. I have an activity that I do use sometimes if I really find that I'm battling. It's called blind contour drawing. It's very common that you just have a piece of paper behind you, sort of on your right hand side if you're right-handed, and you'll hold something in your hand, or just have your hand open that you can draw your fingers, and you draw what you're looking at without looking at your paper behind you. You literally just, you're submitting entirely to the right brain process. And what that does, it doesn't matter what your drawing looks like. In fact, you don't even have to look at it. You can just toss it away. But what that does is it re-engages your right brain again. And disengaging is encouraged by having to keep correcting little mistakes that are made on your canvas from the drawing process. So it's a really, really good idea to make sure your drawing is absolutely accurate and that it is out of the way, you're completely satisfied with it before you start doing the painting process. So artists, I have already concentrated on the grid method in previous videos, so I'm going to do a video on the sighting method, dedicated entirely going into much more detail. I'm then also going to go into more detail on the measuring method, the instruments that artists can use to measure and get your measuring accuracy right. And I'm not going to go into any detail on things like the camera obscura, tracing, or projection. I think those are self-explanatory, but I think the other two methods that is most commonly used amongst artists deserves a little bit of attention too. So watch out for those videos. In the meantime, please really like and share and drop in comments on this video, and I will see you again in day 85. Thank you for joining me. Bye. That's what you want to do.